Hi, this is Jan Spencer in Eugene, Oregon. Thanks for joining us. This is part 4 of a 4-part series, A Primer for Paradigm Shift. This week's edition is taking paradigm shift to a wider audience. But let me mention also that there are presentations I've made during this series that are now on YouTube. And these are those presentations. There's Critique of Capitalism, Aspects, Principles, and Foundations of Paradigm Shift, Real Life Examples of Paradigm Shift. These are all on YouTube right now. And I would also like to point out that I have another series of presentations coming up that are related to these paradigm shifts. These are actually more like paradigm shift in action. You can see December 13th. These are all on the second Wednesdays of the month. I'm really super excited about this particular presentation with my friend Ole Erson in Portland. He is a guide and a pioneer of a preferred future. Kyle Ash Eco Village, an awesome story. Add to that the newly becoming restored Annapurna. These are apartment complexes that were run down, drug infested, with many of the units not even usable. Kyle Ash is now an eco village where 50 people live, and just a year ago, they bought another neighboring apartment complex that's even larger. And this is going to also become an eco village. This is larger scale urban restoration. I love it. So all of these presentations have the same Zoom link to them. So the primer is simply my thoughts over many years about the condition of the natural world, the humans who depend upon it, and what can be done to make a better relationship between humans and nature. It's not working out really too great for anybody right now, in my opinion. The primer advocates a paradigm shift towards a condition where humans fit within the boundaries of the natural world, and bringing out the best and positive human potential is a primary goal of an uplifted society. And this preferred future and uplifted society would be served by an honest economic system. And we don't need to wait until some hopeful, dreamy future to experience the benefits of paradigm shift. As a matter of fact, a lot of people already are. That was last week's presentation, was real life examples of paradigm shift. And of course, again, that is on YouTube at this point. And we are here on this wonderful planet. It's a pretty unique place as far as we know. So here's the contents of part 4. We're going to have a brief overview of the primer. We're going to take a look at a graphic I made that compares the consumer culture and a downsized future. We're going to look at a number of human interest groups. How would they be possibly affected by paradigm shift, and how would they be affected by essentially downsizing? One of the primary elements of this perception of where humans exist at the current time, our economy, our lifestyles, our affluence. The only real way to some type of sustainability is for everybody to use a whole lot less resources and energy. And of course, that has profound implications for the economy and our own individual lives as well. But the caveat is that this process, which is already in the early going, may end up with a happy ending, and many people may say Why didn't we do this long ago? The issue for me is not only the environment, it's human potential as well. The consumer culture does not bring the best out in human, positive human potential. So we're going to look a little bit also at taking paradigm shift to a wider audience, and that can be personal advocacy. And I also want to take a look at public interest organizations, and we'll get a little bit more into that shortly. And another very interesting idea, how about inviting capitalism to a truth and reconciliation session? We'll get a little bit more into that as well. And then we'll do a short review of the entire 4-part series. That won't take too long, but it's important because there's a lot of great content. And once again, it's all on YouTube, 4 parts to the primer presentation series. We did a critique of capitalism. Basically, capitalism is the common denominator of many, many of our social, political, economic, and cultural problems and challenges. It's the common denominator as illustrated there. This was presentation number 2, aspects and principles of paradigm shift. All these great ideals reinforce each other. Positive human potential with modesty of lifestyle, uplift of the spirit with allies and assets. The second presentation goes into more detail of all these relationships here. And then part 3 was real life examples of paradigm shift in the real world in all kinds of different ways. It's young people, it's transforming suburbia, it's education, it's reclaiming our urban places from automobiles. In part 3, we went into more detail on these and a lot of other examples. The fact is, there is paradigm shift going on here and there all over the world, and people need to know about that. So again, here are the presentations that we have coming up. These are going to be monthly. So want to also add, you can do take a screen grab of any of these. When you're watching on YouTube, you can pause and take a closer look. There's a lot of text here, and I am not going to read a lot of the text, but when you're watching this on YouTube, you can pause and you can take a closer look. There's a ton of interesting, useful, practical information here. So this is part 4. That's where we are right now. We are going to be taking a look at personal initiative, public interest organizations. And but first, this is a fascinating exercise to take the idea of a human interest group, and that's just any kind of an organization or grouping of people that have a common interest. It doesn't mean it necessarily is a club. It could have millions of members. How would these different entities manage, and how might they also assist with paradigm shift? This is fascinating. And then when you look at this, you can imagine some human interest groups that I don't mention here because there's lots. And you may wonder, okay, now that I've seen what Jan has to say, how would this human interest group fare? Could be, how would people fare at a high-rise elder center where retired people live? How would they fare with paradigm shift? And of course, paradigm shift is a lengthy process. It could take tens and tens of years if we're lucky. So here is this chart. This is to give us some context for how these groups are going to respond or what their conditions might be. What I have here is a chart. These are different aspects of life as we know it. And these are those same aspects with downsizing and paradigm shift. This would be a great place on YouTube just to stop and take a closer look. But just for example, suburbia at present, well, I'm hoping that as time goes on, suburbia is going to densify with population, and a lot of these yards are going to be turned into food production, solar production, rainwater catchment, building community, collaboration. Even some larger suburban properties might even become eco-villages. We've got to reduce our ecological footprints. Technology at present is basically how can we make more money with new technology. I'm not anti-technology whatsoever, but technology has to serve a higher purpose than just making rich people even richer. The technology has to have some type of oversight so that it serves the public interest. Those are just a few. There's lots of other interesting comparisons here. So the following short writings are intended to stimulate thinking. They are not predictions, but you could say they're hopeful. Absolutely. Do I expect to see all these things happen? I hope they do. I don't expect that I'm going to see all of this, but they are a thoughtful and hopeful look at how a number of well-known human interest groups might be affected by downsizing and paradigm shift. And some of these dynamics are already happening. So let's take a look. Faith communities, churches, mosques, synagogues, temples, faith communities. The ideal that can be embraced by any group or individual, these ideals confer on faith organizations perhaps an even more elevated level of cohesion and purpose for their members and organizations to become examples of sustainable living and reaching out to the wider world. Most faith groups have infrastructure, they have fellowship halls. These types of infrastructure could be made available to groups in the community to have meetings and have gatherings on behalf of paradigm shift. Faith organizations could offer their infrastructure to become something like community centers where there can be meaningful and positive interaction between people. That's how faith communities can serve paradigm shift. I've also mentioned in previous presentations the wisdom of the world's great spiritual traditions. You could not come up with a better list of ideals and principles for basing a personal lifestyle on, or an economic system or a society that's moving towards sustainability. Those care for the natural world, modesty of lifestyle, service to the community, uplift of the spirit, accountability for our own actions and behavior. Almost every major faith organization has some kind of value and advocates these kinds of social behavior. Almost every one of them does. So this is a part of why I feel like that faith organizations should be leading the charge to sustainability in a peaceful, healthy world. Labor, I mean, like organized labor. What better way to revitalize labor than for workers to become champions of environmental and social justice? A good bit of that already is happening. Labor has been co-opted over the past 100 years into the realm of excess and affluence, just about like everybody else. Wanting a more fair slice of the economic pie is a legitimate want. It's just that the current pie is too large. The pie does need to be divided more fairly, but sustainability means everybody's slice needs to be smaller, including labor. Labor has a commendable history of idealism, solidarity, organization, and pursuit of justice. Those are skills that can be a great service to paradigm shift, especially their experience pushing back on big business. as long as there is the understanding that reducing eco footprints is a non-negotiable part of sustainability, labor can play an enormously important role. Changing conditions can open new opportunities for cooperative ventures, economic democracy, paradigm shift, downsizing will certainly create new employer, worker opportunity to produce more new services and products, and also existing products and services that do fit paradigm shift. Perhaps these can also become more worker owned and more cooperative as well, especially with the understanding that these products and services are to support and serve an uplifted society that's living within the boundaries of the natural world. Of course, these kinds of anticipated conditions are very different from what we have now. And worker economic democracy is likely to be a far more accountable and a far more preferable business model as time goes on. That's labor. This is a fascinating article I just read just a couple days ago, and amazing. I read this. It was in CNN. I read this in CNN. It was about long flight tourism. That means flying in a jet plane from one part of the world to another part of the world, specifically. It could apply for shorter flights as well. But the article stated that 10% of greenhouse gases come from air travel. That seems amazing to me. So the contention is, according to this article, and I agree with the article, we just can't keep flying people around everywhere like we are now. So the article described this idea of a carbon passport. And what this means is people would have a fixed amount of carbon that they could put into the atmosphere. And after that, they don't have access to putting more carbon in the atmosphere. And of course, this would be applied to air travel. It could be applied to other things, of course, too. This is sort of the beginning. Think of all the other applications this model might fit. But the article described that the average American is responsible for something like 16 tons of carbon put into the air every year, and that science is telling us that the global average needs to be less than 2. And interestingly, also, it said a round trip airplane ride between New York and London is about 1 ton of carbon for a single person. A lot of people would use up their carbon passport pretty darn fast. So this is what I see here is the beginnings, the early going of recognizing we just can't keep doing what we're doing. We can't keep polluting the atmosphere. There are going to be energy shortages as well, but there's a huge issue of what can planet Earth sustain in terms of how much pollution the planet can deal with. And I found this article to be just fascinating. It also mentioned, I knew this also, that already in Europe, France, for example, is banning short haul airplanes that could be replaced by a 2.5 hour train ride. Shorter plane trips in France are going to be banned. If there's a train that can do the same, substitute that plane flight. So that's this kind of idea of the low-hanging fruit of affluence and pollution. That's what's being addressed here. Of course, it's only a beginning, but that's fascinating. Homeless people. Homeless people is, of course, an enormous issue because there's many reasons, but a big reason is that there's not enough affordable housing because the economic system likes housing that makes more money. Modest housing doesn't make so much money. But in paradigm shift, what would be the potential effects on homeless people? Well, of course, this is all very idealized. And of course, many people already suggesting these kinds of approaches. So this isn't anything really new. Homeless people would be looked after, and homeless people would be taken care of. They would also, if capable, to provide community service as well. People in a more constrained future are going to have to help produce what we need. So, and as along with existing homeless populations, which of course increased tremendously because of COVID, as we downsize our economy and our society, that's going to be rough on a lot of people. And the kinds of services that we can offer to homeless people is going to be should be also available to a lot of people who are going to have a hard time making the adjustments to a downsized society. And of course, the sooner we start making these sort of preparations, the better off we're going to be. So this is continuing with homeless. This is a photo of a homeless encampment. We can provide much better than that. Very modest. Here in Eugene, of course, we have several locations where homeless people have shelter, something along that way. And then, of course, people will be expected, as they're able, to help, like, for example, put in a community garden and lots of other useful tasks as well. Young people have the most to gain from paradigm shift and a more thoughtful future. I'm hoping, like a lot of people, that Biden's climate core comes into being, and they include permaculture in that climate core. I think the idea of public service is a wonderful idea. People need to be paid for that. There needs to be more opportunity for people to learn the kinds of skills that a downsized future is having in store for us. And of course, young people have the biggest stake in sustainability and paradigm shift. The two major political parties, well, I think that we can give them a lot of credit for the condition we're in right now. Of course, they've got some differences, but they both serve the same economic system pretty much without question. What the hope is that as time goes on and paradigm shift gains more traction, then there will be an application of more people understanding we need to downsize, understanding that we need to produce more locally, understanding that there's a need to uplift the spirit, understanding that we need basically to replace capitalism. With this ideal here, with a paradigm shift interest, can support electoral candidates who have those kinds of interests too. The hope here is that even some current mainstream politicians might just say, instead of shifting from one party to the other, they might say, I'm out of there for either of these major political parties and join something like the Green Party. Maybe the Green Party gains enough support to actually have a chance to elect political candidates. We do need that. It's not my particular focus, but having budgets and policies that support downsizing and paradigm shift, walkable communities, alternatives to the automobile, taking care of all of us. These are policies that deserve a lot more attention than they do right now. And political candidates who would identify with paradigm shift. It would be wonderful if there were enough people in the general public to elect those people to into the political system, so those kinds of changes can be actually have budgets and become policies as well. The military, what can we say? The current military budget for the United States is something in the realm of $800 billion. Can we support something like that with sustainability and a sustainable future? Of course we can't. And this, of course, all here is very hopeful, but these kinds of needs to downsize and economize is not limited to the United States. The whole world is in the same condition that way. It's just the U.S. with its world-leading ecological footprints certainly would be a leading candidate to start to downsize. The ecological footprints of the average American is substantially greater even than in the affluent countries of Europe. So how about the military? Well, we could downsize the military. Ideally, there'd be some types of treaties, some types of global agreements that we can't be spending all this time and money thinking we're going to have war with other countries. We just have to somehow agree that we need to apply these resources in a different way. Of course, that's hopeful, but if sustainability is going to ever happen, then the militaries are going to have to be massively downsized, and that talent, that type of organizational capacity, those skills, that money can be applied in a more effective way with our paradigm shift minded political elected officials can have a way to put that money and those resources to a better use. Hopeful, absolutely, it's hopeful, but it's either going to happen or we're going to wish it did. So, yeah, and again, this condition is global. It's not just the United States. And this graphic right here just shows the extent of the United States military establishment with bases all over the world, soldiers all over the world. The world is not always a friendly place, but sometimes what some people think is a solution sometimes actually ends up making it worse. I did this. It's not a real photo. I created this image right here, but it kind of illustrates the idea. Say that we get this platoon right here, and their task for the day is to depave this this bit of concrete all here. Again, this is not a real photo. I photoshopped this, but just to kind of illustrate what this might look like. Some of us are familiar with a transition movement, another organization called Post-Carbon Institute. These are entities that are already advocating paradigm shift. I know their agendas and what they're about, and I'm fully on board with these organizations. I've actually written a number of articles for Post-Carbon Institute. So these are entities that already exist that are making effort to try to move these ideas further along. And my guess is that as time goes on, people who have these kinds of skills are going to become in much greater demand. Post-Carbon, here's just a view of their website. And then this is Transition Movement, just a view of their website. And here are their particular website addresses right here. They are already working on paradigm shift. This picture here illustrates different movements. Of course, Defend the Sacred, kind of an indigenous, Occupy Wall Street, Black Lives Matter, People's Climate March, all of these movements and others as well are related to each other. They all exist to address some damage caused by our economic system. It would be wonderful if these movements and organizations became more cohesive with each other. Doesn't mean they abandon their particular interest, but when we address the issue of a dishonest economic system of capitalism as we know it, when we address that issue, then we start addressing many, many different problems and challenges caused by that economic system. We address many of those issues all at the same time. And if we're conscious of that and collaborate and make common cause, then that helps build a movement, a larger movement with more cohesion and more capacity to make change in our society. Essentially, these movements are already working on paradigm shift, whether they realize it or not, but they are engaged in trying to repair the damage caused by our economic system. So just a few closing comments about this look at these different human interest entities. All segments of society will be greatly affected moving towards sustainability. It's a wonderful idea, doesn't mean it's going to be easy. Many people won't like the idea of having to downsize. It's just inescapable. To assume we can make green our familiar affluence is very unlikely. It's even well into the delusional range. It's just an example of all the greenwash, how the economic system we have is incapable of taking a pause and reflecting on what it's doing. It's always have to be growing and moving forward with new products. Capitalism, as we know it, is not an ally for creating a sustainable future. Better to start making these adjustments sooner than later. Okay, let's go to this next part, taking paradigm shift out to the wider world. So taking paradigm shift out can happen certainly in a variety of ways, and a lot of ways. This Zoom presentation is an example of taking the ideas of paradigm shift out to a wider audience. This part right here, we're going to talk about personal advocacy and organizational advocacy. And of course, these can very much overlap each other enormously. We depend that they will. We self-empower and develop a greater capacity to reach out. That's what this is about. We learn more skills, more experience as individuals to empower our own advocacy for paradigm shift. We build our own skills and capacities. We focus on what is most important to us, but also advocate in a holistic way. We call our own experience and develop new experience so we can become more capable advocates of a preferred future. When we actually behave that way, when we're riding a bike instead of a car, or taking public transit, or changing our diet away from meat-based food choices, simplifying our lives out in the open, when we become a visual example of what paradigm shift can look like, then that makes a more powerful statement. Few impressions make more impact than actually seeing what these changes can look like in real life. Say, for example, somebody has a suburban property, tens of millions of people do. I do too. What I've done is transform my own suburban property over the last 23 years into an example of what suburbia can look like. Literally thousands of people have visited here over the years. Rainwater catchment, grass to garden, edible landscaping, passive solar redesign, increased residential density. It's a community educational resource. other people are doing this as well. The more examples we have of what paradigm shift can look like, the better. And that empowers personal advocacy. So that advocacy, how do we prioritize our own time and money? We can self-educate to become better advocates. So we can articulate a paradigm shift vision to be the change, to be engaged in real projects that we can describe and advocate from our own experience. We want to move beyond a theory. We want real action to share with other people about the value of paradigm shift. So perhaps we have access to the media. We might know somebody at a radio station. We can write letters to the editor, of course. We might be involved with an organization that we can put permaculture or paradigm shift onto the agenda of a program. There are many types of social media we can use to advocate paradigm shift. I have an involvement with meetup groups. There's all kinds of meetup groups. We have in and around the United States, there are dozens and dozens of meetup groups about permaculture, urban homesteading, resilience. There's many, many resources we might have access to for putting the ideas of paradigm shift out to a wider audience. The social media. So what do we have access to? Maybe a class. The agenda item, as I mentioned, at a meeting, social concerns groups, many faith groups, organizations have social concern committees. Maybe that social concern committee can have paradigm shift as a meeting, and people can discuss, invite somebody to talk about a paradigm shift. I actually am on the board of my neighborhood association, and in the month of March is what it is. We are going to have our monthly neighborhood meeting, which can have anywhere from 30 to 50 to a couple hundred people participating either in person or on Zoom. But that March meeting is going to be about creating more food production in our neighborhood and permaculture. And I'll show some pictures of permaculture in action here in my neighborhood. There are a lot of other people in my neighborhood who have these same kinds of ideas. So we all have some type of social, even workplace opportunity to put paradigm shift out to a wider audience. Public interest organizations, I call these PIOs, public interest organizations. There are untold tens of thousands of public interest organizations all over the country. Every city has many. The idea here is we're talking about public interest organizations that have an agenda that is community, public health, ecologically minded. Many public interest organizations exist to address some kind of issue to make their communities better places to live. And as I mentioned before, many of those challenges are the results of overconsumption of energy and resources, environmental, extreme disequity of economic capacity. Public interest organizations have many common denominators. As I'm describing, almost all of these progressive public interest organizations exist to address some issue, some problem caused by capitalism. To me, that says they're all on the same team. Public interest organizations could be coordinating more with other public interest organizations because, of course, as mentioned, when we address the dishonesty and the behavior of capitalism, we address a lot of issues at the same time, a lot of challenges. at the same time. Public interest organizations can play a critical role on behalf of paradigm shift by educating their members. And as I mentioned here, the ideal is for public interest organizations to become much more ambitious with what their agendas are. Do they need to say specifically, we are engaged and in favor of paradigm shift and replacing capitalism? That might be a little difficult to say, but they can still behave in a way with their members and their agendas and their interactions with the community that serve the cause of paradigm shift, even if they might be a little bit shy saying that's actually what they're up to. But here is a list of all kinds of different public interest organizations: economic justice, environmental, different types of cultural change, peace, U.S. foreign policy. There's many more. These are just a few right here. So these public interest organizations can explain to their memberships the issues of overconsumption. Where does advertising fit in? The public interest organizations can advocate for downsized lifestyles. Can you imagine the Sierra Club, the American Association of Retired People, and thousands of other public interest organizations describing real life examples of paradigm shifts where people, like I mentioned, at Kailash Eco Village, community gardens, perhaps they could even be mentioning there's this guy in Eugene, Oregon that's done all this to his suburban property. People need to know that there are untold thousands of people all over the country already creating a more sustainable future. And because public interest organizations have networks, they have websites, they sometimes even have magazines, some have professional managers. They have a capacity to put this kind of information out to a wider audience. And they can also explain to their members that downsizing, taking these actions in your own life, that helps this organization address the issues that we're interested in. So these are all kinds of reasons and capacities for public interest organizations to be more a part with advocating paradigm shift. So we're close to the finish of the primer series. So what I'd like to do is go into a little bit more. I want to do two things at one time. What I want to do is show and tell a little bit more specifically what public interest organizations can help educate their own memberships. But at the same time, this is going to be a quick overview of the previous three installments of this series, A Primer for Paradigm Shift. So that is what we're going to look at next: organizations and paradigm shift. So organizations can explain, this is presentation number one, aspects, foundations, and principles of paradigm shift. Actually, that's part two. And actions members can take. As I've mentioned before, all these different real life examples of a paradigm shift. That was part three. So let's just orient ourselves here. Yeah. Imagine the Sierra Club sharing this kind of information with their 3 million members. The greatest breakthrough needed for paradigm shift and a sustainable society is our own consciousness. Imagine AARP, capitalism and the consumer culture are not partners for environmental sustainability, and personal social uplift. The AARP has lots of important, almost progressive kinds of agendas. I know I'm a member of AARP. So, but part one of this series was about a critique of capitalism and the consumer culture. Here is the image, the common denominator for all kinds of problems and challenges. The consumer culture we touched on is social engineering in an enormous level of social engineering, the advertising and the shopping, the junk food. This is what we looked at in part one. This is also what these public interest organizations could explain to their memberships. I'd love to see public interest organizations explain to their members tens of millions of jobs exist to repair the damage caused by tens of millions of other jobs. We have extreme inefficiency in our economic system, and the economic system depends on it. This was in part one, but this is the same kind of info that could be put out to a wider audience. Capitalism versus paradigm shift. I know the Congress of New Urbanism, wonderful, advocates these kinds of more walkable types of neighborhoods. This picture actually Barcelona, Spain, but our current economic system prefers this to this. Capitalism prefers freeways to public transit because they make more money. But imagine that architects, urban planners began to advocate for paradigm shift with these types of ideas and these types of ideals. Capitalism thrives on economic injustice. Of course, something like the tiny majority, a tiny minority of Americans own a just a remarkable percentage of the nation's wealth. That is a consequence of our economic system. More people need to know about these issues. We're told the American way of life is non-negotiable. We took a closer look at this in part one. But what this is saying is that you people out there, we're telling you, you don't have a choice in what your economic system is. You are basically under our control, and we want you to be a good consumer. Dick Cheney is, of course, one of the people who's mentioned this. Others have too. So there needs to be a greater awareness and understanding that this is the attitude of many people who control the current system. And there needs to be awareness that we can make other plans. That's what paradigm shift is all about. So part two was aspects, principles, and foundations for paradigm shift. Again, these are ideals that organizations can share with their membership. We've seen this graphic before. These, of course, are the wisdom of the world's great spiritual traditions. That's not the religion. These are the social codes, and these are aspects of paradigm shift. Of course, they all support each other. Imagine if local organizations, national organizations were sharing this kind of information with their members and constituencies. And of course, here we are again, aspects and principles, a paradigm shift, the wisdom of the world's great spiritual traditions, a very important aspect of paradigm shift. Another aspect and principle is how do we prioritize our own time and money? We spent a fair amount of time on this in part two. We spend our time and money on products and activities that help bring about a more healthy and sustainable society. Permaculture is another important tool, another important aspect of paradigm shift. You can find an enormous amount of information on permaculture on YouTube and online, but permaculture is a design system for working with nature instead of contrary to nature. Permaculture is more than how to grow a garden. The ideals you see here of permaculture could be used as a foundation for an economic system. It's compassion, its efficiency, its multiple design for multiple benefits. So permaculture is a big tool, a big part of paradigm shift. We talked about ecological footprints. So important for people to know the term of what this means about ecological footprints. I'd love to see the Sierra Club, the groups that are concerned with climate change to put this kind of information out to their memberships. Those desired outcomes are not going to happen unless we reduce our ecological footprints. So part 3, we saw real life examples of paradigm shift. This is my backyard. This is what my place looked like when I moved in 23 years ago. This is what it looked like a few weeks ago before we had our first freeze. Passive solar design, food growing everywhere, rainwater collection, some solar activity going on here. As I mentioned, thousands of people have visited here. It's an educational resource. My website, suburban permaculture.org. I mentioned this. This is currently Kyle Ash Eco Village in Portland. This is real. This is not some Photoshop. A rundown apartment complex has been turned into an eco village. This Mandela garden right here used to be a parking lot. The parking lot was removed and they put a garden in instead. It looks a lot nicer, all kinds of benefits. So I'll mention that the next presentation I'm going to be making in December is going to be about Kyle Ash Eco Village. And this is the next apartment complex that's only at the very beginning of turning into something like this. So this is 15, 17 years. This place here still needs to be repaired, but I've seen the plans for this complex here, and it's going to become a lot more like this. A lot of this pavement's not going to be there anymore. I don't know what they're going to do with the swimming pool, but there's a lot of potential here to produce more basic needs on site. This is paradigm shift. People need to know about this. These are stories that all kinds of organizations can have in their magazines and stories online. Our 42nd Avenue in Portland, this is a very local, very small economic development corporation in the Cully neighborhood in Portland. They're incubating people in planet-friendly businesses. They're repurposing buildings. They started a farmer's market. This is the type of economic redevelopment that fits paradigm shift. And this is human scale. Our 42nd Avenue, they have a website. You can go to their website and you can learn more. But people need to know that these kinds of good works are already happening. I've mentioned young people. This is the Onondaga Earth Corps in Syracuse, New York. And the Onondaga Earth Corps exists to empower young people to do important eco-social work in their communities. And here in Syracuse, a lot of kids come from difficult backgrounds. Absolutely, this is kind of the old Rust Belt. So I've talked with young people involved with Onondaga Earth Corps. This is a wonderful way to learn skills that teach leadership, teach skills about water quality, about taking care of trees, about service to the community. Every town should have something like this, and maybe a climate corps can certainly take on some of these types of tasks as well. Local investment, there's a group in Port Townsend, Washington called Local 2020. This is Local 2020. And they are a wonderful organization in a small town. I wish we had something like that here in Eugene. But this LION stands for Local Investing Opportunities Network. And the short story here is this service, this type of capacity that this small local nonprofit has put together allows local people to invest their money in local projects that in a responsible way enhance the well-being of the community. And this is small business. This is investing in small business. People don't give their money away. They get a return on their investment. It may not be a ton, but it is investing in their local communities. That's LION. That's Local 2020 in Port Townsend, Washington. This is another just awesome example of urban land use. I have a big interest in urban land use, and we have to rethink what our cities are about. And of course, a lot of this type of interest is already happening. Absolutely. This is a view of a nice park in Barcelona, Spain. There's trees, there's places for people to sit, there's kids playing football, what we call soccer. I actually kick the ball around with them a little bit. They're all better than I am. But just a really nice scene of people enjoying the afternoon. It was quiet. It was a nice warm day. People just out in a public place. Well, okay, it's a park, so what? What makes this a really special place is this used to be a busy automobile intersection. There used to be cars all over the place here. The city of Barcelona has a project, their urban mobility plan, and certainly their flagship action is called Superblocks. And what these Superblocks, air quality, quality of life, make more space available for people to create community. But this particular part of the urban mobility plan slowly is turning intersections into parks. Not every intersection, but a lot of intersections. You can go online and look up Superblocks Barcelona. You can find more. There's videos on YouTube about Superblocks. But this is a model people need to know about. We don't even have a car-free place in our downtown Eugene. It's embarrassing. It's totally embarrassing. But this type of model, the planners need to know about. They need to find out how do they do that. We need to be doing that here in Eugene. We need to be doing this kind of restoration all over the country to push back on cars. And that's another program we'll have in a couple months, pushing back on cars. But this is Barcelona, Spain, right here. So we just talked about taking paradigm shift to a wider audience. All these examples can be going out to a wider audience when people know about them, and all these public interest organizations can play an enormously important role in describing and explaining all these wonderful examples of on-the-ground paradigm shift already in action. So I want to close on just this one item right here, truth and reconciliation. Truth and reconciliation is a process. Of course, many of us know this happened in South Africa with the white minority rule over the Black majority. This is truth and reconciliation has been used in Canada, in Finland. The condition exists when there's a stronger more powerful entity that basically is oppressing a less powerful entity, and the less powerful entity may even have more people, like what happened in South Africa. But it's also been used when an entity such as the United States government has committed all kinds of abuse to oftentimes indigenous populations. So Canada and a number of other countries have actually used truth and reconciliation as an effort to achieve some kind of recognition that these problems have existed and something's being done about them. There needs to be some kind of accountability. It doesn't mean somebody necessarily has to go to jail, but in order to heal, there needs to be a recognition that these problems exist. So why am I mentioning this? I'm mentioning this because, in my opinion, capitalism needs to be a subject of truth and reconciliation to bring to some kind of accountability the abuse that this economic system has committed and inflicted on hundreds of millions of people, billions of people. It's not only in this country, it's all over the world. Climate change, the economic social disequity, the homelessness, the drugs out of control. So many of these problems are the result of a dishonest economic system. So truth and reconciliation in paradigm shift as an effort to acknowledge the history of where we are at this point in history, that so many of these problems and issues and challenges are a result of our economic system. There needs to be some recognition that this is, in fact, a truth that capitalism is responsible, and there needs to be some accountability and public recognition of this condition. So this is what a one truth and reconciliation process looked like. I don't know when this was. I took this picture off of YouTube. Well, I think we will leave this for the YouTube version. Paradigm shift, redesignate or downsize. Can we use all the money that we can repurpose? Say the military downsizes by $400 billion. Does that mean we've got $400 billion to apply somewhere else? Well, in a sense we do, but in a sense we need to put a lot of that money away and not even spend it, because we need to downsize. We can't have a green economy and society that has the same size ecological footprints. So that's what this addresses right here. I'm going to leave it at that. So that is the end of the presentation. Volunteer building civic culture, people taking the time and the interest to be engaged in our communities. That is just totally core to paradigm shift. How do we use our own time and money? There's lots of benefits to be gained: social, political, economic, personal. This graphic right here just shows some of the many benefits, and there's lots more as well. So the last image, I just want to mention again that these other presentations going to be making on these dates all have the same Zoom address. These are the other YouTube presentations from the previous 3 parts of this primer for Paradigm Shift series on my website here, suburbanpermaculture.org.